But on the private equity and private capital discussions here, I already floated this as like, hey, this seems like something that could really help the Big 12. Dan Wetzel helped get me there and convince me of that on the Yahoo College Sports podcast. But Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark was asked about private equity. This is a tweet from Ross Dellinger, and Yormark's quote was this, quote, private equity has been out there in the news and people are thinking about it. In some respects, private equity is a validation of where this industry is going and the growth. I don't look at it as a bad thing. The key there to me is just the end of it. I don't look at it as a bad thing. Is it an ultimate sign of growth and like where the game is at? Well, if you ask Nick Pardini in that interview that I dropped on you earlier today, he would say, no, this is not really a game that is growing at the moment. Yormark and Greg Sankey, honestly, what that sounded like is the case that Greg Sankey was making for it, where he's like, hey, people want to invest in college football. That seems like a good thing, right? They feel like there's room to grow here. I would disagree kind of in the overall big picture. I'm with Nick Pardini and what he is saying. But whatever it takes for Brett Yormark to actually like get on board with being open to this or perhaps nudging some of the schools toward it, I would just be fascinated to know what schools are actually engrossed in the conversations here, because Ross Dellinger's article said that there were like 5 to 10 schools that have had some pretty serious talks about this. Are they Big 12 schools, or is this, hey, we're counting, for instance, Florida State and Clemson because they may well need it to get out of the ACC, which obviously makes a ton of sense. Is it going to be like SEC and Big Ten schools looking around like, hey, we've got to get as greedy as we possibly can, and we're going to have to revenue share, so we need to make up that money here? I would think it's much more like, hey, if you're a Big 12 or an ACC school, you're looking around saying, yeah, we've got a revenue share to keep up, and we don't have the extra $30 or $40 million a year that they have from their TV deal. So unless everybody starts turning to this, I would think it would be more advantageous to schools in the Big 12 or the ACC right now, which is the point that I was making here. But to get a little further confirmation about all this, I did pull. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. Maybe I lost it. Did I lose it? No, here we go. Okay. I'm going to play you a quote from Ross Dellinger on 365 Sports, and you should all definitely go check out that interview. But let me make sure I get you this. Okay. I'm going to play you Ross Dellinger here, who backed up that Brett Yormark does seem to be somebody who's a little bit more open to this.
I think he has held discussions with those people about his league. And again, I think he's always looking, right, to grow revenue in some way and always look to improve the conference. And part of that is opening yourself up to everything and trying to go down every avenue. And I think that's an avenue that he's at least looked at, just like a lot of the ADs in the country have. So not real surprised. He kind of comes from that world, right, that outside of college athletics world where the private capital, private equity concepts are quite popular.
Shout out to the 365 guys for getting that interview with Ross Dellinger. You guys should all go listen to that. It was really, really insightful as always. But the point he makes at the end, I think there is really a salient one, right? Like Brett Yormark comes from a world that would be much more accepting of private equity than your typical college athletic. Can we call him like a college athletics wonk? Just like somebody who's been around for a long time as an athletic director that then perhaps has worked their way up to being somebody that's in more of a leadership position, like a conference commissioner. And we're in a totally different world in general in college athletics with where that is at. But because, George Kliavkov came from the entertainment world. Brett Yormark came from the entertainment world. Kevin Warren didn't come from the traditional path, right? So Tony Petitti, more of like an entertainment TV sort of background. Like we're not in that world anymore in general, which is probably another reason why you're seeing more traction with this right now. But Yormark, I would think, would be looking at that like, hey, I've seen a lot of people in the entertainment world benefit from this. I've seen a lot of big companies benefit from this. He would be somebody that would be, I would imagine, much more open to this and looking around and trying to solve the problems of his league. I know that Mac Rhodes seems to be pretty tight with him Baylor athletic director. And again, if we're reading into the interview he did on 365 Sports that was referenced earlier by Clint, where he said, look, we've got to get better at football. Well, how are you going to get better at football more so than just like having more money to be more competitive with all these schools right now? I think that's really it. More money is the biggest way that you can be more competitive in football, or at least maintain being as competitive as you are right now, not fall further behind. So I'd have to think that Yormark is looking at it like, hey, man, this actually could be something that really, really genuinely helps our league out quite a bit. Is it taking somewhat of a risk? Yes. But again, I will emphasize that they will tell you, it is private capital, not equity. Here is a quote from a Ross Dellinger article within the last couple of weeks about it. He references Weatherford, which is Drew Weatherford. So Weatherford describes Collegiate Athletic Solutions as private capital, not equity. There's no ownership here, he says. Schools have the freedom to be flexible with the 50 to 200 million lump sum. It is meant to be spent with existing other capitals. Think traditional debt, booster donations, and bonds to offset expenses such as athletic revenue sharing, coaching salaries, and facility improvements. But the freedom is theirs. The CAS project does not require a management role inside the athletic department, as private equity often does, though they would aim to be advisors to presidents and athletic directors in managing revenue growth. Now, if you want to be really cynical about it, I can understand you coming around and saying, well, look, they're saying they're going to be advisors. Like, what does that mean? And John, you told me for years that like Texas has had too many cooks in the kitchen and too many people basically trying to be advisors. And like, that's a big problem that they have had. That's led to some of the issues that Texas has had and not being as competitive as they should. And you know what? Fair enough. There's probably a little bit of danger in that, but you might be at a point where the risk outweighs, or the rewards outweigh the risk, and that you really just have to take a chance. Like, we might be in that territory right now, is, I guess I would say, my fear, or just my evaluation of where we are at right now. And if you're curious as to how this works, like how does the private capital, like how do those people get their money back? They earn a percentage on any new annual growth. Over a 10 to 20 year period, that percentage decreases from 22% in the first few years to 2% by its end, as the firm meets its original principal investment. Weatherford describes this as taking a revenue royalty. Look, I understand. It's a little scary. It's a little jarring. None of that stuff sounds really great. And it sounds like you could be opening Pandora's box. You could be in for some trouble because of that. I get it. I do see some of it. But I also am now like, hey, maybe this is actually the type of thing that you're going to be forced into doing. Like, maybe there are some benefits here that I didn't quite see at first.